Good morning, everybody. This is Stephen Pugh of the Home Bible College. It is January the 29th, and in the next section of Exodus, from chapter 21, we have recorded the judgments of the Lord on various issues. The first is the judgment on the Lord in the care of servants. Now, slavery today is almost universally condemned, yet in biblical times, and even up until modern times, slavery in one form or another was just a fact of life. What is interesting is that the Lord regulated slavery and made it quite humane and even benevolent. If a Hebrew purchased another Hebrew as his servant, this was on the basis of a limited time. The Hebrew could only be a servant for 6 years, and on the 7th year he was released from his service. If he came in single, then he left single. If he came in being married to his wife, then she was set free too. Excuse me. However, if his master gave him a wife, then in the seventh year he was free, but not his wife and children. If a servant found that his master had been so good to him that he was allowed to devote himself to his master for the rest of his life, he was a bond servant. This involved him being pierced through his ear to the doorpost of the house. This probably signified that his ear was forever open to his master, and his ear was constantly open at the door of his master to hear his master's call. He had to state his devotion to his master. Both he and his family were brought to the judges, and this piercing of the ear was a legal, lifelong devotion. He was not serving his master on the basis of law or obligation, but on the basis of grace and love. The arrangement for the purchase of young Jewish women was quite different to that of a young man. If she does not please her master, then those who are her near kinsmen may redeem her, but they must not allow her to be sold to a strange nation. If he does not take her to wife, then he is free to set her free with food and clothes and obligations of care. She is released for no money. The judgment of the Lord regarding violence was that the punishment was to be proportional to the crime. If a man struck another man and died, then the murderer was to be executed. This was the law of the law from the beginning of time, actually from the time of Noah. And then the Lord in this passage states clearly all the variations of cases in which judgment of execution would go against a man. This applies to the murder of parents, the stealing of a man to sell him for money, the cursing of a man's parents, the murder of servants, the hurting of a pregnant woman causing her to lose her child will be determined by the judges and the husband. And the phrase life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe, shows that there is not to be an escalation of punishment or a diminishing of punishment. If an animal hurt a man, then the animal died. The owner of the animal is free from prosecution unless he has had past knowledge of a similar event, and then the owner would pay with his life. However, he must pay a very large fine determined by the injured, and on the cases go. It's just so many cases. Next we have the judgment of the Lord regarding compensation for loss. A thief must restore what is stolen 5 or 4 times the cost, depending on the case. Again, all the variations of cases are described and the compensation stated. Next we have the judgment of the Lord on evil. A number of cases are described, such as the defilement of a virgin, which was a very, very heavy fine. Those who practiced witchcraft were to be executed. Those who have sexual relationships with beasts are to be executed. Idolaters are to be executed. Oppressing strangers, widows, and orphans will bring about judgment from the Lord. The poor are not to be charged interest on loans of money. If his coat is taken as a pledge of honor, then it must be returned by the end of the day. No one is to speak evil of the gods, that is the rulers of the people, because they are appointed by the Lord to rule the people. The first fruit of the vine, wine, sons are devoted to the Lord. The same is true of oxen and sheep, and no meat is to be eaten, that is, not killed on purpose. No one is to give a false witness or pervert the course of judgment. No one will turn away the poor man who seeks justice. If you see your neighbour's donkey going astray, you must bring it back to your neighbour. Justice must always follow correctly, and there must be no bribery in the courts. Next we have the judgment of the Lord regarding the Sabbath. The land may be cultivated for 6 years, but on the 7th year it is to be laid fallow. Work is only allowed on 6 days, and on the 7th day Israel must rest. On the Sabbath, even the name of false gods must not be uttered. Next we have the judgments of the Lord regarding attending the presence of the Lord. The Lord specified at least 3 occasions when all Israel were to observe the feasts of the Lord. The first feast was the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the second was the Feast of Harvest, and the third was the Feast of Ingathering. All males were to present themselves before the Lord. Then the Lord gives 3 more stipulations regarding sacrifice. Firstly, the blood of sacrifice must not be linked to the Passover. This ends the Roman dogma forever. Secondly, the fat of sacrifice must not remain till the morning. And thirdly, the very first of the fruits are to be brought into the house of the Lord. And last, a kid must not be boiled in his mother's milk. And then the Lord explains how Israel is to find guidance in the wilderness. The Lord is going to send the angel of the Lord, that is Christ himself, to lead them and to keep them on the right path. The Lord gives clear warnings and caution, and always hear and obey his word. If they obeyed the Lord, then he would give them complete health, virility, fruitfulness, and no enemies would stand against them, and they would have no diseases. All their enemies would have the fear of the Lord on them. Israel is to make no covenant with the Canaanites or with their false gods. They are to be completely destroyed. Israel will be the instrument of the Lord to bring judgment on these idolatrous and vile nations. The passages today are full of lots of judgments and lots of commandments, and they're just one after another in a big long flow. So we won't read or bring your attention to any of them, but I do want to bring your attention to the latter part of the second passage. And let's read it from verse 22. But if thou shalt indeed obey his voice and do all that I speak, then I will be an enemy to thine enemies, and an adversary unto thine adversaries. For mine angel shall go before thee, and shall bring thee in unto the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I will cut them off. Thou shalt not bow down to their gods, nor serve them, nor do after their works, but thou shalt utterly overthrow them, and quite break down their images. So this, as you can see, this was a complete destruction of the nations of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and Jebusites. They were to be killed. They were to be destroyed. People struggle about all this. People say, oh, why is God so cruel? This is a genocide. Well, it was a genocide, but it was a genocide that was a judgment of God against nations that were so exceedingly evil that the Lord was using the children of Israel as an instrument to bring about his premature judgment. So it's a little bit like an executioner executing somebody that's evil. He's not doing it because he himself is evil. He's doing it because it is the law that evil should be destroyed. And that's what Israel were called upon to do. They were to be a holy nation living in a holy land. And those evil nations who practiced the most terrible abominations were to be completely destroyed. And you'll notice also that when they went into the land, take a look at verse 28, I will send hornets before thee, which will drive out the Hivite, the Canaanite, and the Hittite from before thee. I will not drive them out from before thee in 1 year, lest the land become desolate, and the beasts of the field multiply against thee. But little and little I will drive them out from before thee, until thou be increased and inherit the land. And then the Lord gives the boundaries. And my password is that little passage, thou shalt not bow down to their gods, nor serve them, nor do after their works. Thou shalt utterly overthrow them and quite break down their images. You see, Israel had been raised up by the Lord to be the people of the Lord, a holy nation, and God was going to use them as an instrument of justice and righteousness in the world. They would destroy the wicked, and they would totally obliterate the religions, the false religions, and the wicked religions of these nations. Even today, it's pretty difficult to know how evil the Amorites, the Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and Jebusites were, because their people were totally destroyed, and their religions, their false religions, were totally. Nobody serves these gods today. They were absolutely and completely cut off. Well, God bless you. I look forward to speaking to you again tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye for now.